Thank you. If I had wanted to, when I had gotten to work here this morning, I could have placed an order on my phone for any number of things. Christmas lights, a bicycle, some shampoo, a frozen turkey, a new dress, and had them make it here, delivered before the end of this service, probably. And in our world, that is increasingly the baseline expectation. That I can sense that I need something and it will appear. And the effort that I need to put in to making something appear for me is less and less and less. It's what retailers call friction. They want to reduce how difficult it is for you to get something. And when I think about that reality that we all occupy, I think a lot about the questions that I asked during the Wonder Box. How could I know what it meant to have enough? How could I possibly understand sufficiency in a context where stuff is genuinely at my fingertips 24/7? And frankly, how could any of us tell the difference between abundance and excess in a country where 12.4 million children receive SNAP benefits, and one person is on track to be not just a billionaire, but a trillionaire? How could any of us ever understand the difference between abundance and excess in that? Surrounded as we are by both profound need, right? People whose lives are shaped by that, and the billionaires on the other. It's no wonder that so many of us struggle to understand, do we have enough? And as I consider those, here's two things that I want us to hold in tension. Because anytime we talk about consumption, anytime we talk about wealth, anytime we talk about economic inequality, here's two true things that I want to hold up for us. On the one hand, every person deserves to live abundantly, to never know want, to experience luxury and joy and rest, to have the chance to eat steak and lobster or their vegan equivalents, right? To eat chocolate cake, to not have the state of Wisconsin tell them that because they receive SNAP benefits, they can't buy energy drinks or Snickers bars, that chocolate is not reserved for the privileged few. That's true. And the overall scale of our consumption is destroying our planet. There's not really a lot of argument there. And the scale of our consumption, and I use our to mean us as sort of US Americans, right? The scale of our consumption is destroying not only the planet, but also the economic futures, and sometimes the very lives, of millions of people, particularly in the global South, whose lives are shaped by the low wages and unsafe working conditions that produce most of the stuff that makes up our lives today. I think if we did an ethical audit of the clothes that most of us are wearing today, it would not be great. And I include myself in that, right? And those things are both true. They're both real. So in economics, there's this concept called externalities. And externalities are the impacts of a transaction that are not captured in the cost of the transaction itself. The classic example in economics of a negative externality, right, something that comes as the result of a transaction that's negative, is pollution. Right, every month, the fellowship, we pay our We Energies bill. In exchange, right, we give them money, and they keep the lights on and give us natural gas to make the furnace and the stove go. Most of you have that exchange too. But of course, what we pay to We Energies in exchange for the electricity and the natural gas does not capture the true cost of those products to our community. Because there are environmental impacts. There is pollution. There are things that happen as a result of that transaction that are not reflected in its cost. But those impacts, though they are external to that transaction, they're an externality, they are deeply, deeply material to our well-being. And for me, when I think about these externalities, these things that exist outside of the monetary transactions that govern so much of how we move in the world, is where I experience a tension between a world that is so often framed in economic terms and a world framed in terms of our religious values and our beliefs. Right? Because when we talk about our values, love is at the center of the world that we are trying to build and the way we want to be in it, not profit. We elevate generosity and interdependence as core values, values that speak to our commitment to build a world where everyone has enough, because we live as a reflection of the truth that we are only as rich as our poorest neighbor. Because I would say that from the perspective of our values, from the perspective of our theology, there's no such thing as an externality. There's no way to say that that is somebody else's problem. That pollution is somebody else's problem. That exploited worker, that's somebody else's problem. That person who needs assistance in order to afford the basics of their life, somebody else's problem. Right? There is no cost of my decisions that I can transfer outside of my own concern. Because if I am genuinely bound up inextricably with every other person on this planet, then accounting for the impacts of my decisions, the way I live my life, on people who I've never met and whose names I don't know, right, that's actually a moral imperative. To bring it to the very practical, I think about it this way sometimes. Right? The young people who mined the cobalt that powers my iPhone, and most of your smartphones too, right? That cobalt did not magically lift itself out of the earth. That cobalt was mined by people. It is a profoundly unsafe line of work. Right? Their lives are just as valuable as mine. And maybe even more valuable than my ability to check my email anywhere, anytime. But sometimes, when we start to talk about this kind of decision-making, right, how do we apply our values to the economic decisions that we make and the ways we move in the world, when we talk about how to bring our values into the choices in the world such as it is, when we talk about taking those things that economists call externalities and making them internalities, bringing them into our own hearts and minds, sometimes, and I know none of you would ever do this, me either, sometimes it can get a little holier than thou. Sometimes we get a little puritanical about who can best perform our values without upsetting the apple cart. And I will confess that nothing gives me a headache faster than a conversation among people who are economically comfortable about what good consumption choices they make. I only buy organic grass-fed beef. I drive an electric car, but the right kind of electric car. I take the right kind of vacation. How would you know that what you had was enough? How would you know that what you have is sufficient for yourself, for your family, for your community? And if you had enough, what would you do with the rest? What would you do with the rest if you knew, not up here, but here, if you knew here that you were only as rich as your poorest neighbor, that you were only as secure as the least secure person in your community? Here's another set of truths I want us to hold in tension. 1, right? How many of you have heard the phrase, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism? Yes, right? That there is no purely ethical way to buy in our current economic system that exploits the many for the profit of the few, that there's just no way. There's no way you can go to the grocery store and not somehow be participating in someone's exploitation somewhere. And so you might as well call the whole thing off. You might as well just not worry about it because there's no way you could do it right. And that's true, right? There's no way, you cannot go to the grocery store and not somehow inadvertently participate in an unjust economic system. And the choices that we make matter. Not because my reusable straw is going to single-handedly reverse climate change. It's not. But because every decision that we make about where and how we spend our resources shapes our ability to ensure that everyone has enough. And when we're holding two things in tension, as I've talked about today, right, the tension between everyone's right to live abundantly and the fact that our cultural definition of abundance is killing the planet, right, the tension between the reality that there is no ethical way to consume, right, in our current economic system, and the fact that your choices matter profoundly, they shape your community. When we're holding things in tension like that, we sometimes want to adjudicate which one is really more important because we don't like the way the tension makes us feel. But when we're trying to figure out how to make our highest values, values like interdependence and generosity, when we're trying to figure out how to make those values interface with a world that is at best indifferent and frankly sometimes hostile to those values, I would say that feeling tension is actually a good outcome. If there wasn't tension, I would be worried. That tension is a natural thing that happens when we share our values and try to make them fit in a world that doesn't always share them, that sometimes is working counter to those values. Of course we feel tension trying to understand whether we have enough in a world like that. That tension, that feeling of discomfort is, for me, the internality, our internalization of the truth that we are interconnected and that our decisions impact other people, not just economically, but existentially. But then, of course, comes the question, what do we do with all that tension? My direction to you is not just to sit and stew in it. Don't worry. You get an off-ramp today. So here's a couple off-ramps to that tension that's inherent with trying to figure out how to understand what it means to be generous, what it means to feel sufficient, what it means to feel our interdependence in a world that's so often hostile to those things. So one potential way to engage that tension is to just think about what is the value that I want to hold as I navigate that tension. What is most important to me as I navigate it? Right, and that doesn't say that you're going to fix it. You alone are not going to fix anything, but you alone can navigate those tensions. Right? Is it generosity? Is it interdependence? What are you carrying with you into that tension? And then here's the other one. What if your tension about what it means to have enough is about a deeper question? The deeper question that Ava talked about at the end of her reflection, what if all that tension and anxiety that makes it hard for you to answer the question, do I have enough, is actually because you don't know the answer to the question, am I enough? And that so much of our anxiety about, do I have enough? I think she has too much. I think they don't have enough. Do I have enough? Right? It's actually, there's that question underneath it, am I enough? And as Unitarian Universalists, we give that a wholehearted yes. You are enough as you are right now. But the dominant messaging in our culture is not that. And so those are the two tools I invite us into to engage that tension. You were like, she's going to fix all my problems. She's going to tell me exactly how many books I should get rid of. How many coffee mugs is too many? How much money in my retirement account is enough? Oh, that got silent. You were like, that is way less comfortable than the question about coffee mugs. And so my invitation is that we don't try to avoid that tension and instead figure out our way into it. Because how would you know that you had enough? How would you know that what you have is sufficient for you, for your family, for your community? And if you had enough, what would you do with the rest? What would you do with the rest if you knew, not just up here, but here, that you were only as rich as your poorest neighbor? May it be so. Amen.